Hi class and welcome to the short video lecture for dating, mating, and aging, the effects and economies. If we were in class, I would have started off by just asking you what are the three industries that really never go out of business? And it's the business of people being born, the business of people getting married, and the business of people dying. And thus, from a business and economics perspective, these three trends around how people are being born or whether new humans are being born or not, also how are people meeting and getting married, and also how are people choosing to have their last rites, are all important business and economic ideas that you want to have your eye on, and you want to be able to see if you can develop businesses in any of these. I would have also asked you, like, how many of you want to get married? How many of you want to have a child, more than one child? Why or why not? And I think I've shared this in class before. Hunter and I are choosing not to have children. And part of that is an economic choice. Because I work in a different city and I live in a different city, but there are lots of couples like us that are either choosing to just have one child or have no children at all, and this is going to affect the birth rate in a country. So if lots and lots of people start doing that, the birth rate starts to go down. If the birth rate starts to go down, this has effects on economy and business that you want to understand and be familiar with. Also, I would have asked you, if your grandparents, how did they meet? How did they decide to get married? And most of you would have said, oh, they knew somebody from church, or they knew somebody from around the block, or they kind of lived in a 2 mile radius of somebody that they met and they decided to get married. And that's how most of our grandparents met and decided to get married. However, our parents' generation changed some of that, and our generation has really, really changed a lot of that, where how people decide to meet today through online means is really vastly different than the options that people had in the past. Okay, so let's talk about dating real quick. A lot of the stuff that I want you to be familiar with in dating comes from Aziz Ansari. He wrote a book called Modern Romance, and it's a really, really powerful book that you should read in your own time. There's a sample of this in this link that I've provided if you'd like to watch it. What he did is he basically had some negative dating experiences that he has covered in this stand-up show of his. It's on Netflix. It's called Aziz Ansari Live in Madison Square Garden, and you can watch from 23 minutes, 42 seconds to about 42 minutes. And that's the section where he covers how people are dating in today's world, and how we're texting and ghosting on each other and meeting each other online, and how that's kind of affecting how seriously or not we take romance and courting somebody. This is some tips from his book Modern Romance in 3 minutes that you can listen to. So these two you definitely want to listen to. This you want to listen to on your own time. And then the point of over here was to say that one of the things that he found is that our grandparents' generation, or 80 years ago, 70 years ago, people pretty much met and got married to people for economic reasons. So a lot of women chose to get married because that's the only way they could have any independence or life of their own, get out of their dad's house. And so it wasn't this finding the perfect partner type thing. It was just very practical. And they tend to meet people who lived in a 2 mile radius of them. So just, how many ever neighbors you had, those many doors, were potential pathways to meeting your person. And the parallel that he draws is through this online dating world. We now have endless and millions, endless doors that we can kind of walk through and meet so many different kinds of people. And in some ways, this is a great thing to have so much choice that we can try and find the quote unquote best possible mate for us. But realistically, it becomes analysis paralysis, right? So we have so many decisions that we become indecisive, and we keep holding out for something better and better and better that we may or never find. And this is happening to a lot of people with this need to find the perfect partner and the ability to have so many different options. The combination of this has actually resulted in more people choosing to not date seriously or not get married at all. And this has tremendous effects on the GDP of a country and economy and how businesses can or cannot operate. Okay. Also, I want you to listen to this podcast of Bumble founder. Bumble is a dating app. Whitney Wolf, she worked with Tinder. Initially, she was one of the co-founders of Tinder, and then she had a very negative experience at Tinder. She was dating somebody who was also a co-founder, and they had a really nasty fallout, and so she ended up leaving Tinder under really brutal conditions, and all of that inspired her to create a female empowering dating app, and that's what Bumble is. So kind of like listen to that as also. This particular link talks about how in today's world, Japan, for whatever reason, has the lowest, but one of the lowest birth rates. And so you have an aging population in Japan and not too many new people being born. And one of the reasons not too many new people are being born is globalization has shifted gender dynamics in Japan such that women are more likely to have a job, have independence and an income, and this has made Japanese men as a whole feel a little redundant and has changed the dynamic of the household and the expectations. And so a lot of Japanese men have become voluntarily or involuntarily celibate, and they either don't date or they date very awkwardly. And one of the examples of how this has really seeped into the culture is that in Japan, often you will find that apps like Tinder or online dating apps have men's profile with a profile picture of a rice cooker instead of like their picture, so kind of showing how socially awkward dating and mating has become in Japan, to the point that people aren't really doing it, and this is plummeting birth rates in Japan, having huge future effects on the economy. Okay, so dating leads to mating, right? Which leads to babies. So this first link is a very controversial link on the economics of sex, and it talks about how when you introduce a birth control pill, you basically took away the liability that comes with unprotected sex or mating, and with that, sex went from being a very highly priced thing that women were able to control and men wanted, to going to becoming something that was really freely available, especially with online dating apps. It's becoming really easy, or the bar for males or females, especially males, to get sex is very, very low. It's very easy, in other words. And so because of that, the other pressures that were on men, like, okay, if you want sex, you have to get married and you have to have a child and all of that, all of those implications and consequences have now gone away. And because of that, the economics of sex and who is in power and who has control has completely changed. Okay. So go ahead and listen to that one also. Hidden Brain is a podcast that I would highly recommend that you listen to. This particular episode on dating and mating. It's literally named Dating and Mating. Listen to that one. It's the rings and wedding section. So it's a link that's talking about, hey, why people will never find the perfect ring, or how you should buy a used ring. And so there's lots of business or economics around jewelry buying when it comes to engagements. That's another huge aspect that I would want you to focus on and think about. If I know some of my students in the past have had their parents own jewelry businesses, or they wanted to own one. So these are important kind of things to keep track of. Also, some of these links are talking about how, similar to the economics of sex, how sex culture or dating culture has completely changed. And so it's now become more of a hookup culture, and how there are many unspoken rules of what women and men should or should not do. Don't reply immediately to a text, don't text too long, nude selfies to send or not send, all of those things. And this is a very, very different world that we live in today than even our parents' generation did, or heck, even, some of us that are in our, late 30s did. 15 years ago, the world looked very different, and the rules around sex were very different. And so this is a very, very steep shift in a very short period of time, disruptive. And in this class, as you know, we focus on any trends that are disruptive and the implications on business and economy. So also listen to this podcast on when did marriage get so hard. And then there's also good TED Talks to listen to. This one you can listen to in your own time. Definitely listen to this one, the one by Esther Perel, on how do you hold on to desire in a long-term relationship when it starts to get boring. And so I think it's a really interesting talk in general for you guys to know. Okay, so after anybody's kind of lived a life, at some point death is inevitable, right? You can never avoid death and taxes. So I would have asked in class, how old would you want to live, what age, why that particular age. A lot of people would be like, till I'm functional. If I have dementia, I don't want to live anymore. And maybe till I'm 80, 90. And so then I would question you, like, why 80, why 90, why not 180 if you could? And they're like, and people usually respond by, well, that's not possible, but if it was, even if it was, would I want to live that long? Does that mean that I would be working till I'm like, 120 years old to be able to afford to live till I'm 160, So, and how would I do that? And how would my body stay young? And so these are all questions that science, technology, and business are all grappling with. So we've talked about birth rate being very low in some countries like Japan, when the birth rate is far lower than the death rate, or the death rate far exceeds the birth rate. This is a country experiences a negative population growth. In other words, you have more old people than young people. And in a few years, when the old people die out, you'll have less population than you had before. And therefore, there are less bodies to work on jobs that were previously occupied. So then you have to now substitute these jobs with something else. Do you do it with artificial intelligence, with robots? Do you try and make people live longer? Do you try and make them work longer? Already in the US, because of the last economic crisis and maybe this current one that we're going to experience because of coronavirus, people are choosing to postpone retirement from their 60s, as it traditionally was, to maybe a decade later. And so in Japan, it's not uncommon to see some octogenarians, 80-year-olds, still working. And so how does business and technology affect that? Can it support it by, for example, creating spines, like external spines, like cyborg technology that attaches to humans to allow them to lift stuff or walk, when their body starts to give out but their mind is still active? So these are questions that we're going to cover in this section. So falling birth rate affects economies. This is something that you want to read in this article. Here are some of the highlights. One of the greatest strengths of the US is that we have a relatively high birth rate, which keeps our population pretty young. A growing population, like I said, is very good for the economy. However, Americans have been waiting longer to get married, as we've talked about in the dating section of this. And often because of economic difficulties, they might not want to have kids, or might wait longer to have kids. And this affects economies, because fewer marriages and fewer children lower the rate of household formation, which means that people spend less on everything from appliances to clothing to stuff that makes the economy hum and tick, right? So people just start buying less and consuming less because they're creating less people and they need less stuff. In some ways, this is good for a lesser carbon footprint, but just like with companies, economies also hold on to the idea that if you're not growing, you're dying. So you have to keep expanding and growing. And so if you have a negative birth rate, or you have more old people than young people in a country, this will start to affect GDP in a big way. Okay. In Japan, we have a population crisis, like I said, because a lot of people are either not mating at all, they're involuntarily or voluntarily celibate, and so you don't have as many babies being born. And so if you have a negative birth rate or population growth rate, and you have very few people being born and lots of aging population, then you have people that are basically now working even into their late, like 70s and 80s. So will robots replace people because of declining population? Will people try to have children outside of biological time clocks by having an artificial womb. This is a pretty controversial thing, but there are a couple of incubators and artificial wombs that are being tested right now, so that people don't actually have to wait on a biological clock to have children, and they can have children at whatever time. This would also solve some glass ceiling issues. If you're in my human resource perspectives class, I have shown you one of these videos of an external artificial womb. Or maybe humans start to become cyborgs, where we start to integrate technology into our body, so we can have stronger spines, tougher legs and arms, carry more, lift more, walk more, do more without breaking because of old age. So these are 7 countries that are at risk for becoming demographic time bombs. A lot of them tend to be Northern European countries, where people are either not having children or having very few children. And this is another controversial idea of how you can inject young blood into an older person's body. And with this blood replacement, they actually start to be younger and feel younger, because young blood has certain antibodies that would basically reverse almost the aging process. And there are some TED Talks that are even talking about how do we look at aging as an illness, in order to, and just as we prevent illness and disease, we kind of prevent aging and stave it off for a really long time, so that people can potentially live twice as long as they're living right now. Some business implications for aging. Tech definitely sees an opportunity in an aging population with, like I said, cyber technology and whatnot. But you also have different ways in which people are choosing to be buried. As you're probably aware, funerals are very expensive. Buying a plot of land, buying a casket, all of this stuff runs into the hundreds and sometimes thousands of dollars, definitely hundreds of dollars. And so people are choosing alternative forms of when they pass away, what should be done with their remains. So there are different burial alternatives, from being buried with your ashes, being buried with tree seeds, and planting that seed so that you have a tree in place of like a gravestone, or people are choosing for the entire body to be carbonated into a diamond, which is not possible. So there are definitely business opportunities with regards to this, and eco-burial opportunities that sort of make the body combust back, not combust, but just sort of revert back to the earth and become dust. Because if you know anything about funerals, the way they're traditionally done, people preserve the body, almost like mummify the body, and preserve it with all these chemicals, and then put it in these strong iron caskets. So it's not, the idea is almost preservation of the body under the earth, rather than that the body going back to Mother Nature. So people are choosing to go away from those traditional ways of trying to preserve themselves forever under the earth, to maybe more eco-friendly burial options. That's it. I hope you're able to watch all of the videos and you get a lot out of it, and you get some good ideas on how you can participate in the disruption that is happening in birthing, dating, mating, and aging in the US and other countries. Good luck. Thanks.